Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And the most important updates are coming from Crimea. The Russian sources and the Russian forces expect the possible massive missile strike that Ukrainians are going to make during the next day, during the 7th of May, because if you remember, yesterday we talked that 7th of May is the inauguration day when the Russian President Putin will enter his new term. So that's why the Russians expect a lot of provocations from the Ukrainian side. And when talking about the provocation, according to the Russians, the Ukrainians are planning to use around 50 drones and tens of, let's say, Navy drones, let's say in the vicinity of Crimea and Crimean ports and above Crimea as well. And today, the Ukrainian intelligence service, the special forces, published the video of how they were operating around Crimea in the Russian ports area with Navy drones. On this video, we can see another Ukrainian Navy drone who was flying along the shore and was searching for some ships to destroy. And in the final moments, in the final seconds of the video, we see that the Russians were trying to bring that Navy drone down, but the Russians couldn't manage to do this, and after that the Navy drone destroyed another Russian boat. Very small boat, nothing special. So from the Ukrainians haven't managed to achieve significant result by that attack, but the fact is that Ukrainians on that video was let's say swimming somewhere here, so right in front of the Russian defense area. So for you to know, there is like a lot of defense belts that the Russians try to use against the Ukrainian Navy drones. Something like a shield, something like a walls they try to build, and not with these walls not allow the Ukrainians to bypass and to enter the main, let's say, territory of the port infrastructure. But based on that video, we saw that the Ukrainians managed to bypass those walls and to attack a Russian ship, which confirms that the most likely the Ukrainians currently managed to establish complete dominating in the at least western part of the Black Sea and in the ports, in the port infrastructure of Russian Federation, also along the western, let's say, shore of Crimea. So today we're going to expect significant number of attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack Crimean bridge and many other things. But the Russian sources reported and the Western sources confirmed that from now on the Russians are no longer using Crimean bridge to supply troops in Ukraine. If you remember, during the previous months we were talking a lot that the Russians are building the bridges and the railways. Let's say on the southern part we have significant number of, let's say, photos and videos of the Russians, let's say, railways that goes along the Azov Sea from Rostov-on-Don to Crimea. So the Russians don't have any issues and any problems with supply and support. But anyway, this might be not a very pleasant media victory from the Ukrainian side if the Russians lose Crimean bridge once again during the inauguration process. Of course, it's going to be not very good. Furthermore, the resources reported that Ukrainians start sending significant number of reinforcements to the eastern part of Ukraine. Now the Ukrainians are concentrating forces in Dnipro and Zaporozhye area, and most likely this situation is connected with the, let's say, moving and sending additional reinforcements and military aid from the Western countries. Today we got more updates of additional Bradleys that were crossing the border between Poland and Ukraine, and the Bradleys were heading to Ukraine, to the area of the special military operation. So this video confirms that Ukrainians start receiving additional military aid and that soon they will try to stabilize the line of combat contact. But of course there's still lots of time, lots of things to do for the Ukrainians for stabilization, and it's not even known that whether the Ukrainians are able to do this or not, but at least they will try to do this. Because when talking about the line of combat contact, the Russians continue pressure, continue attacking the Ukrainians. Currently the Russians are focused mainly on Prichistovka area. During the previous 24 hours we got additional video of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions. This is a new direction for us. We haven't received anything during the previous phases of the special military operation. Just let's say in April and May the Russians began being very active on this direction. We understand that most likely Prichistovka is the key to crack the Ukrainian defense belt to the south of Kurakhova, and this should be like a part of Russian offensive into Velika Novoselovka and Noglidar as well. Now we're moving to Очеретино area. We have additional updates from different mappers, either the Deep State mappers or Syriac map and different other mappers confirms the additional Russian progress towards the village by the name of Novopokrovska. For now we haven't received even a single geolocation confirming this, but most likely this exactly what is happening right now in the direction. The Russians are moving, the Russians are pushing, and the Russians try to get Novopokrovsk, because from this town, from this settlement, the Russians will get the possibility to move further in direction of the village by the name of Novoselovka Persha. So they're moving, and most likely we're going to receive more and more updates about additional Russian progress. We see counter-artillery duels, we see counter-drone duels. The Russians are hunting the Ukrainian armored vehicles and tanks. On this video we can see the Western tank. Some sources reported that that was Leopard the first, and some sources reported that that was another Abrams destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone strike. The Ukrainians are trying to do the same. The Russians try to attack from Solovyovo further to the west in direction of Sokol and Novoselovka Persha, but the Ukrainians mine the area, making, let's say, a significant number of, let's say, minefields, which is very difficult to bypass for the Russians. We haven't received anything from Kalinovo, Novo-Alexandrovka area. Some sources report about further Russian progress. Some sources are saying that the Russians took a small operational pause for regrouping and preparing for further offensive. Very interesting updates we continue receiving from the area between New York and Alexandropol. As we discussed, currently with lots of mappers, lots of analytics make their own statements and analysis whether the Russians are going to move further, let's say Pokrovsk or New York. As we discussed, I believe that the Russians are going to move to New York because this area is very close to the Russian main artillery positions and main Russian supply arterias. So that's why it's going to be much more easy for the Russians to attack. And furthermore, we have significant number of geolocations of how the Russians were bombing and fabbing and attacking the Ukrainian positions exactly in this square. So we see a certain, let's say, Russian artillery and aviation focus exactly in this area, which confirms that most likely the Russians are going to move, let's say, here. Currently, we can't tell for sure when exactly the Russians are going to start its movement, but most likely after the 9th of May, somewhere, let's say, in the vicinity of the 15th of May. Now we're moving to Bakhmut Artyomov's direction. The Russians continue attacking the Ukrainians in Klishchiivka. A few days in a row we were talking a lot about the Russian attacks along this line, the Russian attempts to attack along this line, and so nothing special, just another day of artillery strikes. Chasiv during the previous, we still haven't received any updates confirming the Russian presence and the Russians entering the eastern part, so the clashes continues without any progress or changes on the ground. Very interesting details continue receiving from the north in Kupyansk direction. We have lots of videos. The sources reported that the Russians start bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces in the area heavily. We got additional videos of, let's say, drone strikes, of artillery strikes, of missile strikes in the area. On this video, we can see another concentration of Ukrainian forces that were destroyed as a result of Russian long-range artillery fire. Also, the sources stated that yesterday, somewhere at 9 p.m. of the local time, while we were watching the previous video, the Russians began a very heavy artillery preparation in Stelmakhovka, and I'll remind you that just a few days ago the Russians captured some positions in front of Stelmakhovka using the Golf cars. This is the video of Golf cars attacks. So the Russians, as you can see, managed to bypass every single tree line in front of the village, and most likely after artillery preparation that started yesterday, the Russians will try to storm Stelmakhovka from, let's say, in front. So most likely this is going to happen because we also have some Russian activities on the flanks in the area. The Russians, let's say, start offensive from Novoselovka towards Stelmakhovka from the northeast. The Russians were clearing the trenches. We see the close combat between Russian and Ukrainian forces. The video was published by the 77th, let's say, Air Mobile Brigade, and the video shown us how the Ukrainians were trying to repel the Russian attack, that the Russians were planning to attack something like this. So we see that Stelmakhovka is most likely the next target of the armored forces of Russian Federation, at least if the Ukrainians will not be able to slow them down. Now we are moving further. The Russians are digging in deeper in Kotlarovka-Kislovka. We haven't received any updates during the previous night, so the Russians are clearing the area. They managed to capture all the villages in this direction, and very difficult to understand whether the Russians are going to move further to the west, but we know one thing for sure: the Russians have begun the clash clashes in the village by the name of Ivanovka. So the Russians have started an offensive, and most likely today we're going to receive some updates about the territory, because I don't think the Ukrainians are going to hold this area for a very long time, because it's very difficult to do this when the village is already semi-encircled from the south, from the east, and from the north. Kupyansk, nothing special. Kharkiv direction, the border lines continue boiling. We have lots of Iskander strikes, lots of FABs during the previous night. The Russians continue hunting and destroying the Ukrainian forces along the border, preparing the foothold before further offensive. From the other side, we see the same activity from the Ukrainian side. We see the Russian tracks moving further to the borderlines with a significant number of infantry, so the Russians continue a concentration process. The Ukrainians see the concentration process and they try to destroy the Russian tracks, cameras, communication equipment, and many other things. The same story we can see from the Russian side as well. The Ukrainians concentrate their forces in front of the border as well, trying to slow down the Russians, and the Russians also hunt them. So this is the situation on the ground. We have also interesting updates from political events. Today, according to information we have, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine does not recognize Vladimir Putin as a democratically elected and legitimate president of the Russian Federation. But the important state is that United States of America recognized Putin as a president. So basically nobody cares about what the Ukrainian thinks about the Russian president and so on. Furthermore, the Russian sources reported that officially reported using the rich network of the Telegram channels that they continue developing the resistance in Ukraine, that the Russians are saying that there is a very rich network of resistance on the territory of Ukraine, and if you want to let's say help Russia and help pro-Russian Ukrainians, you need to connect with the special service by the name of Dazor. So, and the Russians provide some instructions how to connect with Dazor and how to help Russia to, let's say, to fix the situation in Ukraine by the Russian meanings. Furthermore, the Russians are about to finish the construction of the biggest airfield that located along the border with Ukraine. The airfield that, according to the most of the experts, the Russians are going to use to bomb and attack the Ukrainian positions on the western part of Ukraine. And another important thing, once again, today Russia has the inauguration at 12 p.m. of the local time. So most likely Ukrainians will do everything they can, all the best, everything they can just to ruin and to break this event. So that's why the Russians will increase the measures of security, and most likely we are not going to see significant, let's say, movements on the ground, because the Russians mainly will focus on the security of its citizens and the security of that event. So we'll see what is going to be next. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.